If you are in your 30s or 40s and you think the best wealth years are already gone, I need to hit you with something hard. That belief is not wisdom. It is financial theater. It is a lie sold to people who confuse a graph with a life. They show you a 22-year-old putting away a tiny amount every month, and they draw one smooth line to millionaire status as if real life is that clean. It is not. Real life is rent. Real life is debt. Real life is the bill that shows up the same week your tire dies, your friend gets married, your landlord raises the price, and your paycheck still looks too small. So let me give you the truth in one line. Your 20s are usually the drip. Your 30s and 40s are the pressure line. And if you do not understand the difference, you will spend the best wealth building decade of your life apologizing for the wrong decade. That is the first mistake. The second mistake is even worse. You think the game is about starting first. It is not. The game is about reaching pressure and then aiming it with discipline. I have watched people worship early compounding while ignoring the far more dangerous fact that most people in their 20s do not have enough surplus to make the math bite. They have motion without force, noise without weight. They feel responsible because they opened an account. They are still not building real scale. I am not mocking the habit. The habit matters. A person who learns to save early has done something admirable. But admirable and decisive are not the same thing. I want you to hear that very clearly. The habit can start in your 20s. The wealth usually gets built when the pressure arrives. That is why this matters so much. Because if you are 35, 38, 42, and sitting there with guilt, shame, and that rotten feeling that you missed the boat, you are standing right next to the engine room while crying on the dock. You are not late to the main event. You are early to the part that actually counts. I have sat across from people who almost whispered their age to me, like it was evidence. 36, 41, 40. They said it the way a defendant says a guilty plea. Then I looked at the facts. What was their life at 24? What was their income? What was their rent? What was their debt? What were they pretending they should have been investing with? A fantasy salary, a fantasy apartment, a fantasy set of bills. A fantasy life with no chaos. People punish themselves for failing a life they never had. That is madness. In your 20s, a lot of your money is not being wasted. It is being consumed by setup costs. You are buying mobility. You are buying room to breathe. You are paying for mistakes. You are paying for training. You are paying for bad landlords, fragile jobs, cheap furniture that breaks, student debt, transport, social pressure, and the price of not yet being established. That is not always irresponsibility. A lot of the time, that is the admission fee for adult life. You do not get rich because you hated yourself early enough. You get rich when you finally have enough surplus, enough stability, and enough aggression to direct capital with force. That is the mother line of everything I'm about to tell you. Not more time, more pressure, not earlier guilt, better aim, not the drip, the pressure line. And once you see the game that way, 5 mechanisms appear. Most people never name them. That is why they never control them. I name things because unnamed forces own people. Named forces can be used. The first mechanism is the surplus gap. That is the distance between what your life costs and what your labor now produces. That gap is the engine, not your gross salary, not your age, not your motivational quotes. The gap, a person making $30,000 can look respectable on paper and still have almost nothing left. After tax, rent, food, transport, utilities, debt payments, and the random nonsense that adulthood keeps throwing through the door, call it 50 pounds a month, call it 100, call it 200, if they are unusually disciplined and unusually lucky. Now compare that with a person in their late 30s making $50,000, $60,000 or more. Their bills may rise, their life may become more complex, but the bills usually do not rise in a straight line with income. That is where the game changes. If you earn $30,000 and manage to invest $50 a month, that is $600 a year. If you earn $50,000 and manage to invest $800 a month, that is $9,600 a year. Same species, same market, same index funds, same long-term return assumptions, completely different pressure. One is a drip, one is a hose, and people stare at the calendar while ignoring the pipe. That is why they misread their whole future. I want you to picture 2 identical tanks. One gets fed by a leaking faucet, the other gets fed by a fire line. Then somebody walks in and starts talking to you about how the leaking faucet had a 10-year head start. Find the fire line still wins. That is the insult hidden inside most early start advice. It pretends time is the only variable with teeth. It is not. Contribution size has teeth. Tax treatment has teeth. Behavior has teeth. Lifestyle stability has teeth. A strong surplus deployed for 25 years can beat a weak surplus deployed for 35. Not in theory, in cold arithmetic. And here is the judgment that most people need but do not want. If you are in your 30s or 40s and still obsessing over not starting at 22, you are wasting emotional energy on a weaker variable, while the stronger variable sits untouched. That is childish finance. You do not need more regret. You need a bigger, cleaner surplus gap. That brings me to the second mechanism. I call it the great calming down. This one does not show up on a spreadsheet first. It shows up in your nervous system in your 20s. Your spending is often chaotic because your identity is chaotic. You are trying things on jobs, cities, friends, relationships, clothes, restaurants, status games, mistakes. You say yes to too much because you do not yet know what deserves a no. That is expensive. Then something happens in your 30s. If you are paying attention, the performance begins to bore you. You stop needing every purchase to prove you are not behind. You stop paying retail for other people. Opinion, you get tired of the stupid subscription life. You get tired of money flowing out in 20 tiny leaks that somehow become a flood. You begin to want fewer things, but you want bigger outcomes. That shift is worth more than people realize, because wealth is not built by occasional heroics. It is built by sustained direction. A person who can invest 9,000 pounds for 1 month is not impressive. A person who can invest 600 pounds every month for 15 years because their mind finally stopped chasing nonsense is dangerous. That is why I call it the great calming down. You are not becoming boring. You are becoming investable. You are becoming the kind of person capital likes. Stable enough to automate, mature enough to delay applause, clear enough to stop bleeding. People talk about discipline like it is a personality trait. Most of the time it is a clarity trait. Once you know what matters, restraint gets easier, not easy, easier. And that ease compounds. You cook more, you compare better. You cancel faster, you upgrade slower, you stop buying relief at full price, you stop turning stress into Amazon boxes, you stop financing insecurity. Now let me put numbers on that so this does not turn into soft prose. Suppose you used to leak 300 pounds a month into casual, forgettable spending. Not one big disaster, just dining. Impulse purchases, convenience, subscriptions, random upgrades, and the kind of lifestyle fog that never feels dramatic enough to fix. 300 a month is 3,600 a year at a 6% real return over 20 years. That stream becomes well over 100,000 pounds of potential capital that never got a chance to work for you. That is the cost of emotional static. And here is the harder judgment. People say they cannot invest. A lot of them mean they have not yet calmed down enough to face what their current behavior is costing them. Those are not the same sentence. If your life is still built around keeping yourself constantly rewarded, then of course long-term investing feels slow. You are competing against your own dopamine payroll. Beat that payroll and the whole game changes. Now we reach the third mechanism. And this is where late starters often begin to overpower early starters. I call it the tax rescue. This is where adult income stops merely being bigger and starts being smarter. In the UK system, your pension is not just a retirement box used properly. It is a tax extraction machine, a rescue operation, a way of redirecting money away from the tax bite and back into your own future balance sheet. When you are younger and earning at the lower end, the benefit is useful. When you move into higher earnings, it becomes viciously important. Let us use the threshold from your source logic. Once income climbs above the higher rate band mentioned there, the tax bite on the income above that line gets much uglier. Now imagine somebody earning $65,000. A big chunk of their earnings above the threshold is being hit hard. If they do nothing, that money travels one way out. If they use pension contributions efficiently, especially through salary sacrifice where available, a chunk of that money gets rerouted before the tax hit lands with full force. That is not magic, that is structure, that is not a loophole, that is using the rules before the rules use you, and structure beats intention every time. If 100 pounds of pension contribution only costs you around 8 pounds out of pocket because of the tax treatment, then every contribution is arriving with a built-in lift, not from stock picking, not from genius, from refusing to hand over what you were never required to surrender. Do not miss the violence hidden in that difference. Put in 58, own 100. That is not a motivational poster. That is a force multiplier. Do that month after month, and suddenly a person who started later is not merely catching up. They are arriving with leverage the earlier version of them never had. This is why I get impatient when people say, I should have started at 21. With what tax position, with what salary? With what access to strategic pension funding? With what surplus? With what stability? You are comparing a child with a toolkit to an adult with a machine room. That is a foolish comparison. The real example is everywhere. A 37-year-old professional finally clears enough income to use salary sacrifice properly. They direct 600 or 800 pounds a month into pension contributions. Their employer match adds more. Their tax treatment improves the entry point. Their net cost is far below the amount actually going to work. That person is not behind a 24-year-old casually investing a token amount from a stretched paycheck. That person is operating on a different level of the board. And here is the harder judgment. If you are now in the income bracket where tax rescue is available and you are not using it, then your problem is no longer lateness. Your problem is leakage at scale. You are not a victim of time. You are a donor to inefficiency. That is a much less flattering sentence, but it is the useful one. The fourth mechanism is what keeps this story from becoming a retirement sermon. I call it the access ladder. A lot of people resist pensions because they think all long-term money gets locked too far away. That fear matters. Freedom delayed too long can feel fake, so you need a second lane. That is where a stocks and shares ISA becomes powerful inside this specific logic. A pension is a tax rescue for later. An ISA is freedom capital for earlier. One builds the fortress, the other builds the drawbridge. That distinction matters. If your only plan is pension heavy, you might become rich on paper but still feel trapped in your 40s and 50s. If your only plan is total liquidity, you may miss serious tax efficiency. The adult move is not choosing one tribe, it is building the ladder later, money below. Sooner, freedom above, step by step. In the source material, there is a powerful point that younger earners often cannot get anywhere near using the full ISA allowance. That matters because unused capacity is wasted strategic space. A couple in their late 30s with stronger incomes can actually begin to fill meaningful chunks of that space together. That can become a very serious tax-free pool over a decade. Do the arithmetic at $40,000 a year combined for 10 years, and the numbers become large enough to change behavior, choices, and entire household psychology. At a 6% rate, you are not talking about hobby money. You are talking about £500,000 of accessible, tax-sheltered capital. That is walk-away money. That is take-a-year money. That is bad, boss money. That is care for a parent money. That is protect. The kids' money. That is not abstract wealth. That is option power. And option power is one of the most underpriced assets in the life of a working adult. If you have never had it, you underestimate it. If you have lost it before, you understand exactly how expensive its absence can be. Here is the judgment most people miss. A person who thinks only in terms of retirement age is still thinking too narrowly. The point of wealth is not merely old age comfort. The point of wealth is decision power before the body gets tired and before your patience gets sold to the next employer. That is why the access ladder matters. It lets you convert disciplined surplus into present-day courage, not reckless courage, back courage, and back courage changes how you negotiate, how you sleep, how you parent, how you endure, and what kind of nonsense you are willing to tolerate at work. The fifth mechanism is the one people argue with emotionally and lose to mathematically. I call it the late starter overrun. This is where the myth dies. A lot of people have built their whole identity around the phrase, "I started early." Good for them, but early is not the same as heavy, and the market responds to wait. Let us compare two paths using the source logic. Investor begins at 25 and manages a very respectable 250 pounds a month. That is not a joke for a lot of people at that age. That is difficult. Keep it going for 35 years with real returns around 6% after inflation, and you end up with a meaningful pot. Now take investor B, starts at 35, spent the earlier decade trying to get life upright, now earning more. Now able to invest $800 a month across pension and ISA. Do that for 25 years, and the ending value can come out far ahead of investor A, despite the 10-year delay. That is the overrun, more force, less time, better structure. And when contribution levels climb further, the gap can become brutal. Push to $1,200 a month with smart use of the tax system, and suddenly the final number is operating in a completely different weight class. This is the part where people say, yes, but the early starter could also increase contributions later. Of course they could, and some do. But that is not the point. The point is that the person who believes they are already doomed at 35 is psychologically disarmed by a false model. They think time alone closed the door. It did not. The door they need is pressure plus structure plus consistency. And that door may be standing open right now. The example from the source about James matters because it is not exotic. A man at 36 feels shame. The shame is false. He starts using salary sacrifice. He funds his ISA. Years later, he is on track for a large portfolio by 60. Not because he discovered an obscure trade, not because he married into money, not because he bought some miracle stock, because he finally respected the pressure stage of life. That is why I call it an overrun. The late starter does not win by turning back the clock. The late starter wins by arriving at the real game with more ammunition. Now, I need to do something even more important. I need to flip your identity, because until your identity changes, you will keep acting like a guilty beginner, when what you need to become is an operator. You are not a failed early investor. You are not a cautionary tale. You are not the person who missed compounding. That is weak language. That language makes you small. If you are in the age band where income has improved, emotional chaos has cooled, and the tax system finally gives you tools worth using, then your proper identity is this. You are a surplus operator. You are a capital allocator in your pressure years. You are the person standing at the valve. That identity is tougher and truer, and it forces better questions. Not, why didn't I start sooner? But, how much pressure do I control now? Not, what if I am too late? But, how much of today's surplus is being wasted? Not, can I still catch up? But, what happens if I stop leaking for 10 years? That is a stronger mind, and strong minds build strong systems, which is exactly where we go next. Because a story without an operating system is just temporary emotion. Late starters do not need inspiration, they need protocol. I call this the pressure protocol. It is simple enough to live with and hard enough to matter. First, capture the payroll gate. The moment money hits your account, your odds fall, so intercept it earlier if possible. Use salary sacrifice where available. Use pension contributions that occur before the money becomes spendable temptation. Use employer matching like it is oxygen, because it is. An employer match is a return you do not have to pray for. Ignore it and you are stepping over money while complaining the race is unfair. Second, set the floor, not the dream. People fail because they design heroic monthly contributions. They cannot emotionally survive. Do not start with the fantasy version of yourself. Start with the floor you can sustain when the month gets ugly. 200, 400, 600, whatever is real. A floor is powerful because it continues when motivation dies, and wealth is built by what continues. Third, split the river. One channel for later security, one channel for earlier freedom. That means pension and ISA working together, not fighting each other in your head. The pension gets the tax rescue. The ISA gets the access power. One reduces future fear. One reduces current captivity. Together, they turn saving from punishment into architecture. Fourth, trap the raise. Most people get a pay rise and upgrade the visible parts of life before they upgrade the invisible engine. That is how decades disappear. If income rises by 300 a month and you absorb all 300 into lifestyle, you have trained yourself to stay fragile at a higher price point. That is not progress. That is inflation wearing your clothes. So decide in advance that a chunk of every raise gets captured automatically. Not after thought. Before thought, if half of each raise goes to the pressure line, your surplus gap expands without asking your willpower for permission. That is how professionals begin to look financially dangerous. Fifth, kill one leak at a time. People love dramatic resets because dramatic resets feel pure. Most of them do not last. Find one leak, cancel it, redirect it, then do it again next month. 300 here, 80 there, 120 somewhere else. This is not glamorous. It is compounding with a knife. And over 3 years, it can change your entire funding level. Sixth, measure by capital deployed, not by emotional effort. This is crucial. A lot of people feel financially serious because they think about money all the time. Thinking about money is not deploying money. Watching videos is not deploying money. Worrying is not deploying money. Regret is not deploying money. Your real score is how many pounds reach productive assets this month, how tax efficiently they got there, and whether the process can repeat. That is all the rest is theater. Now, let me take this even deeper, because the danger is not only that people start late. The deeper danger is that they start late and still think like spectators. A spectator asks whether the market is about to crash. An operator asks how much dry powder, how much automation, and what buying process is already in place if prices drop. A spectator asks whether now is a good time to begin. An operator asks how long they plan to keep deploying and why 1 month matters inside a 20-year campaign. A spectator looks for confidence. An operator builds a machine. This is why I keep saying the point is not literary beauty. The point is tactical clarity. Because once your 30s and 40s become the pressure years in your mind, the rest of the logic snaps into place. You stop worshiping the clean graph of the early starter. You start respecting the ugly strength of the mature allocator. You stop fantasizing about what a better younger you would have done. You start controlling what today, as stronger you can still do, that is adulthood. And adulthood used properly is a financial edge. There is another truth nobody likes hearing. The market does not care how sincere your regret is. It does not pay a premium for guilt. It does not multiply your portfolio because you finally understand what you should have done at 26. It rewards funded discipline, only that. So if you are carrying old shame, put it down. Not because I want you to feel better, because shame wastes time, and time is now feeding the strongest years you have. You need those years clean, you need them unclouded, you need them aimed. Let me give you the harshest version. The person who started at 22 and never built real pressure can spend 20 years being proud of the wrong thing. The person who starts at 37 captures a strong surplus gap, uses tax rescue, builds an access ladder, traps every raise and stays calm. For 15 years can walk straight past them. That happens more than people think. Why? Because the game is not won by the earliest alarm clock. It is won by sustained capital volume sent into productive assets through intelligent structure. That is the whole fight. Now maybe you are listening to me and thinking, fine, but I have a mortgage, I have children, I have aging parents, I have real obligations. Exactly. That is why the protocol matters. Nobody serious is asking you to cosplay as a carefree 23-year old minimalist. You do not need a monk's life. You need a governed one. A family budget with no structure is fear with receipts. A family budget with a pressure protocol is a plan. The obligations do not disappear. But once capital begins flowing into the right places with consistency, the obligations stop feeling like proof that wealth is impossible. They become constraints inside a machine that is manageable. And because it is manageable, it becomes repeatable. That is where confidence finally comes from, not from being told you still have time. From watching the system work, month 1, the contribution lands. Month 2, it lands again month 6. The ISA balance starts looking like an actual reserve. Month 12, the pension is no longer theoretical. Year 3, pay raises have been trapped instead of consumed. Year 5, a market decline stops looking like a horror show and starts looking like an acquisition window. That is when the identity really changes. You no longer feel like somebody catching up, you feel like somebody building, and builders sleep differently from people who are apologizing. There's also a moral dimension here that I do not want to ignore. A lot of adults in their 30s and 40s are not trying to build wealth because they want to look rich. They want to stop being easy to corner. They want to stop being one job loss away from panic. They want to stop having every hard family decision pass through the filter of immediate cash stress. They want margin. Margin is not greed. Margin is dignity. And dignity is expensive when you do not build it on purpose. That is another reason late. Starter shame is so destructive. It makes people hesitate during the exact decade when their financial actions can create the first real margin of their adult life. They tell themselves they are behind, so they act small. They act small, so they stay weak. They stay weak, so every external shock feels personal. Break that cycle, and the benefits reach far beyond portfolio size. You become harder to bully, harder to rush, harder to trap. That is what wealth is supposed to do. Not impress strangers, reduce coercion. One more thing. Do not let the perfect tax setup become an excuse for no setup. Yes, structure matters. Yes, salary sacrifice matters. Yes, ISA allowances matter. Yes, sequencing matters. But an imperfect machine that runs beats a perfect machine that remains a spreadsheet fantasy. If you need to start with one automated transfer, start with one. If you need to begin below the amount you think is impressive, begin below it. Tiny done beats ideal delayed. Just do not confuse tiny done with tiny forever. The goal is not to congratulate yourself for opening the account. The goal is to grow pressure. Every few months you should be asking one brutal question: how do I increase the monthly force? More surplus, less leakage, better tax routing, higher capture of raises, better household coordination. That is how you move from participation to command. And command is what you need now, not innocence, not a second youth command. I want to return to the metaphor because it is the cleanest way to remember the whole framework. Your 20s are often the drip, useful for learning, useful for habit, useful for understanding the plumbing. But the drip is not where the tank fills fastest. Then the pressure years arrive. Income rises, impulse falls, tools improve. Tax strategy matters, paired planning becomes possible. Raises can be captured, access capital can be built. Now the pipe can finally do serious work. If you spend those years staring backward, you commit the stupidest financial sin available to a late starter. You ignore pressure while mourning time. Never do that. Mourn if you must for one afternoon. Then get back to the valve, because the valve is where your future actually lives. And I will tell you something else that people are often too polite to say. Not everybody needs 30 years to get free. Some people need 10 or 12 years of ruthless consistency. That is a very different emotional proposition. If I tell you that you need heroic discipline until age 67, your mind checks out. If I tell you that 10 hard, intelligently structured years could completely change the next 30, now we are talking about something a serious adult can grab. That is another retention lie people tell themselves. They imagine the task as endless, so they do not begin. But once the surplus gap is wide enough, once the great calming down has happened, once tax rescue is active, once the access ladder is being built, once the raises are trapped, then a decade of force can do astonishing damage to fragility. That is the proper phrase, damage to fragility, because you are not just adding money, you are destroying dependence, you are shrinking fear, you are reducing the number of employers, emergencies, and bad decisions that can own you. That is a better goal than millionaire status by some arbitrary age. Money is not the trophy, reduced vulnerability as the portfolio is just a scoreboard. So where does that leave you if you are 33 or 39 or 46? It leaves you in the pressure years if you decide to act like it. It leaves you with a real chance to build more than the younger version of you ever could have built. Not because you are smarter now in some abstract way, but because the field finally favors force over fantasy. This is why I do not want you leaving with inspiration. Inspiration fades. I want you leaving with a sequence. Check the payroll gate, use the match, route the pension, open the ISA, set the floor, trap the raise, kill the leak, measure deployed capital, repeat. There is your operating system. Nothing cute, nothing mystical, no soft landing. A machine for adults who are tired of being financially fragile. And if you want my bluntest final judgment, here it is. You did not lose the wealth game because your 20s were messy. You lose it only if your pressure years arrive and you still behave like you are waiting for permission. No one is coming, no cleaner decade is coming, no perfect mood is coming, no earlier starting age is coming. But if the surplus is finally there, if the tools are finally there, your mind is finally calm enough to hold a line, then the best decade to build wealth is not behind you. It is the decade you stop acting weak inside. Miss that, and the loss is yours. Use it, and a lot of people who started earlier will spend the next 20 years wondering how you passed them.